You ever been betrayed by someone you're trusted for such a long time? I sure got the biggest betrayal, and it was my own younger brother, William. Someone I trusted so much and never thought in my heart he ever hurt me in any way. My name is Michael. This is my story how my brother betrayed me. I will give a brief background all about it. My family owns a restaurant that my grandpa started with grandma years ago. Grandma taught me all her recipes. She didn't write them down since she preferred that way. They weren't like top secret or anything, she preferred to keep them by memory and by heart. I wanted to work there after high school, so I did help around when I could during middle school, like as a waiter or take out trash. Shortly after high school, I started working there as a cook. My dad taught me how to be a professional cook. My brother William eventually will also start working there, but he was more lazier than and didn't do much help. Mostly things with was management, which also my dad taught him about. Since grandpa died, dad took over, and since I was the oldest, I thought I would be the one to take over the business. How naive I was about that. Now to the main part of the story. I have been working at my family's restaurant now for a few years. When this all happened, I was about 22 years old. I was mostly in the kitchen, and ever since I started working as a full-time employee at my family's restaurant, and since I was the main cook other from my dad. So, and since my grandma taught me all about the recipes that she came up with. And over time, I still served exactly as she had taught me. But I did some changes from time to time, either with new ingredients or some improvements. You may think my grandma would be mad if I changed the recipes. That's the complete opposite. She actually told me before she passed away that if something would happen, I should continue to improve the recipes but keep the same thing as its original. If I had to do some slight changes or slight improvements, it was okay because sometimes with time we had to do some improvements, some things. And since she taught me everything, and I remember every single part of the recipe by heart. So I never wrote them down like my grandma did. And I actually followed her guidance in that because she taught me that doing those recipes by heart, you don't even need a recipe for that. So I actually agreed. And since then, my dad also did taught me some management, how to manage to operate the place if my dad wasn't even there, if I had stepped in as an acting owner, since my mom was even part of the staff, much that she was more like a waiter or a hostess. My brother William did work with the family restaurant. He did start working shortly after he finished high school. But he was more lazier than I thought that he would be, because even when he was doing that on part-time or helped around when he was in middle school or even high school, I thought that he would be stepping up and grow up a bit more. Now he is a full adult. But I was naive on that. But he wasn't totally a slacker. He did improve his skills as a management. I give him credit for that, but otherwise, he never did any cooking. And over time, I was getting better and better in cooking, and I was proud to keep the legacy of my grandma. But then it all happened. During the time when I joined the family restaurant until then, I was single. My last relationship were in high school. But since it didn't work out as much as I'd hoped for. So I decided to focus mostly on the restaurant business to help to improve our business. But then I fell in love with this girl named Elisa. Elisa was around the same age as me. We weren't not in from the same high school, but we actually ran into each other from a mutual friend. Turns out she was a friend of my best friend Jasper. Well, technically more like she was more acquaintance to my best friend Jasper. And he was the one who introduced me to Elisa. At first, we started smallly, like build on dates. We didn't make any official until like a year. And then she started coming to my restaurant from time to time, having lunch with the family or dinner for the family or something. But eventually, she did help around in the restaurant as a waiter or a waitress. And my family was happy. They loved her. But there was something that I didn't even call out much until later on. At first, when my brother first met her during a family dinner, he was very, how to say, not flirtatious or anything, more like he was very happy. He was very outgoing, he was very charming. They have a lot of talk. And it did happen that they did run into each other from time to time in town, or he gave her a ride home, or something. And I actually sometimes did ask him if he could give her a ride home, since if I had to stay back in it at the restaurant to do some cleaning. And he had no problem. And I was like happy that my brother and my girlfriend Elisa was bonding well. Because after only about a year of dating, I was actually considered to actually propose to her. And I had even got the ring for that. But my world went downhill fast. Because one day, or at least one evening, when I went to back to restaurant because I forgot my phone, I saw them. They were in my dad's office kissing. Of course, they didn't see me, but I recording that for a brief moment before leaving. I kept this to myself for a while until she decided to tell me something was different, because we weren't living together, so that was a good bonus, I guess. But she started acting a bit different. For some time to time when we were on dates, she was sometimes on her phone, and when I asked her if something would happen, she always gave me a dismissed answer on maybe just one or two word answers, or made some excuses. That had happened that she left during our date, like if uh, we were at a cafe or we were on a walk or something, and then I saw them in the restaurant one evening again. I was stunned. This time, I actually confronted both of them. But William, he didn't even deny that this didn't even wasn't wrong or it was a mistake. Then I just simply asked one question: how long had this been going on? Since me and Elisa have been dating for a year, and he said for at least a few months. And I asked Elisa, did she even love him? Or if she was even serious about him? She said that she was more serious because he was more handsome, he was a bit younger, he was much more than I could even offer her. I was stunned. I didn't say anything else, I just left. And the next day, before we opened the family restaurant, I actually told my dad and my mom we needed to talk as a big family meeting, included with my brother and Elisa. They were so curious and confused as to why to bring Elisa if she was even part of the family. But then, as the meeting started, I got really upset. I told them exactly what happened. I even showed them the recording of my phone. They were stunned. But then my brother William said the most shocking. Elisa was pregnant. And they have been going on for at least a few months now, he said. And Elisa was actually happy to be pregnant because she wanted to be a mother. And I was like, what the? I couldn't even speak much. Then, and then when this revealing that my brother was going to have a baby with my girlfriend, well, I would say ex-girlfriend, since I told them, at least told Elisa, this is over between us. I don't want to be with her anymore. But she was actually happy that I did break up with her and preferred to be with, well, with my own brother. And then I got the most shocking. Turns out William had already told our parents Elisa about this. He and Elisa have been seeing each other, and then my most shocking news. My dad told me he had been considered to hand over the restaurant to my younger brother, not me. And to the most shocking, he said, Michael, since you know all the recipe by heart, I think it's probably the best that you teach your brother how to, so that he can prepare those recipes on his own. Liz teaching him. I was stunned. I was standing there for a moment, and then I started laughing. It's like, do you honestly think I would even fall for that? No, I will never teach my brother any of the recipes, and even try to go find them, because I never wrote them down. Grandma never did it either. She taught me to keep those recipes by heart. And I'm done. I can say this, Dad, or correction, former Dad. I'm done with his family. When my mom heard this, she started crying. She begged me not to say it like this because it will break her heart, and this will break my grandparents' legacy. You know something? My grandparents, my grandma wouldn't even have it when this happened. Grandpa would definitely have disowned William. Don't speak like that, said my dad angrily. You don't know what my dad would say. No, I may not know that, but I know for a fact in my heart he wouldn't even approve this. And you want the recipe? Forget it. Those are mine. Grandma taught me them. If William wanted to learn about them, he could have asked me at any time. You could even have told me to teach William on any of the teachings or the recipes even then. But none of you never even bothered to do that. And for you, Lisa, I'm happy that you picked my lazy, stupid moron brother over to me, because I was actually going to propose to you, and I even showed them the ring. She was stunned. But not anymore, I said, and put it back in my pocket and left. And also, before I left, I'm cutting ties with the whole family, so don't even bother to talk to me ever again. After that, I left the restaurant with the hurt feelings of betrayal that my girlfriend cheated on me with my own younger brother William for a few months, and now that she is pregnant with his baby, and more the shocking that my dad was more willing to hand over the family business to my brother, and even had this demand I would teach him all the family recipes to him. But since I never wrote them down, or grandma did, so I was like, good luck to try to replicate those dishes without their recipes. So, I felt so heartbroken. I just drove my car, but I didn't go to my apartment. I went to Jasper. He was a little bit surprised because it was still early in the early noon. Like, hey, dude, what are you doing here? Aren't you supposed to be at work? Well, I quit. When I said that, Jasper was astonishingly shocked. What the? What do you mean quit? I mean, I thought you loved the place. Yeah, but can I come in? It's a lot to explain. He just nodded and we went to his living room and sat down. So tell me, what happened, man? It's a lot to handle. Well, um, first, as like I said, I quit. Um, I broke up with Elisa. Whoa, 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 whoa. You broke up with Elisa, and you were even going to propose to her. Jasper was the only one that I had told about this news. Yeah, well, that's because I never going to do either. Now she is dating my brother. What? She's dating William? Yeah. On top of that, she is pregnant. With his baby of all. What? Are you freaking kidding me? Yeah, it's true. And I even showed him the recording of them. I found evidence of them being together. I'm so sorry, man. This is out of the shock, though. I mean, I know that she's only a acquaintance of mine, but I never thought that she was even be like this. Well, what about the family business? Well, they might actually not even be able to still continue with the recipes that since, as you know, my grandma taught me them, but I never wrote them down. So, and another bit of piece of information, my dad demanded I teach William the recipes, but I literally refused, and I have now cut ties with them. Dude, dude, that is just wrong. But I think it's probably best that you don't get yourself involved with them. Yeah, I agree to that. So now what? I don't know. By the way, you know our friend Nick? Oh yeah, Nick. What about him? You know that his family owns his own restaurant nearby? Yeah. How about this? Why don't you try to apply for that restaurant to work there? I mean, probably. I mean, unless you want it. No, I think I need since I will have to pay my bills and all. So I took his advice. A few days later, I went over to Nick's restaurant, and he was surprised, but he was already informed from Jasper, and he agreed to hire me, since he was now the manager, even though his parents still owned the business. I started working there, and their restaurant was a little bit bigger for my own families, and was popular as well. And I decided to introduce sort of my the recipes my grandmother taught me, but made some changes and improvements. And it worked. I later learned from Jasper, who actually went to that my family's restaurant, it wasn't even going so well as much as they thought, since now that they don't have the original dishes anymore, they were struggling because most of the common customers that they had started to leave, and even when they have new customers, they never even return either because they had heard this restaurant was so good with food, but when they heard that the restaurant no longer serving those, they ordered some other food, but it was not the same taste. Now these days, they probably would have, before I left, the restaurant was usually packed with people, full of people. Could have been over like 40 people at most. But one time when I literally passed by, the restaurant would like have maybe just not even half of the full. They were like maybe just maybe 10 or 12 people at most. And I later learned from my family who reached out to me begging me to come back. But I said I was already working in a different restaurant, but they asked me if I could give them the recipes. I said no. Grandma taught me them, and they belong to me. She told me if no one else doesn't value the families, value the trust, they don't deserve to have them. And it wasn't even a lie, because my grandma did tell me that. My dad almost demanded them, but then I'm like, if you really wanted to have those, I can give you recipes on my terms. I was considering to go back to the restaurant. So I did went back there, but not as to work, but just to see how things were like. And when I walked in, there was like maybe just 5 customers, and just based on their face expressions, they weren't happy about the food because some of them were our regular customers. So when they saw me, some of them actually smiled and asked if I'm going to cook something. I shook my head and said, no, I don't even work anymore. I'm just here to see what my family wanted. They looked a bit sad to hear this. But I went in my dad's office and he smiled when he saw me. I hadn't even seen my family from that point when I left, and that was like a few weeks ago. After that. So he started begging me to come back, but I held my hands and said, no, I'm not coming back, but I don't want to see this business to fail due to the fact I left, since I know that my grandparents struggle sometimes even when they first start open their own restaurant, I said. Dad just nodded because he knew about it since he also worked there when he was a teenager, also in high school. He knows the struggle was so very close that they were almost a few times they were very close to being shut down the business. But my dad helped. When I was born and I was helping around, the business was flourishing. And I could not see the business that my family built from the ground up to just simply be shut down. When I was in my dad's office, my brother walked in with Elisa. I could tell that William was really much felt guilt, and he had some bags on his eyes because he had been struggling in the kitchen of been cooking. He had been cooking some dishes that he knows about, and not the one that we usually served. And he asked if I'm coming back. I said, no, I'm not. But I said by holding up a finger, I will be teaching you how to serve the food that we usually did. But you really had to show honesty on this. If you don't show anything, if you don't even take this serious, I won't be helping anymore. And I would be just simply saying, I've just been watching and let this place go down if they go to that. My dad was literally in shock. But I said, that isn't something I don't want to, of course. As long as the William is taking this seriously, and you too, Dad, since you're also a cook, I want you to do the same thing. My dad just nodded, so I had talked to Nick and his parents if I could take a day off from maybe twice a week so I could be going to my family's restaurant to teach them about some of the basic things they needed. And I actually even wrote down the recipes on paper this time, like an actual manual or cookbook, because I was not going back there. And during those few weeks after that, even for just 2 days in a week, I taught not only Michael, William, and my dad, but also Elisa. She actually did show some interest in cooking when we were dating. So I taught them everything, as much as I could. I told them exactly when Grandma taught me. Of course, there were some mistakes in the beginning, but it's understandable since they've never literally been cooking that type of food by themselves. But just after 3 weeks, I was a little surprised how dedicated not only William, my dad, and Elisa were in this. Elisa literally had even got her cooking license for in order to be be as a cook. And one time later, maybe 2 months later, I actually went back there with my new girlfriend named Betty, a girl that I knew from school. And when my brother saw me, he gave us one table and promised to give us some of the food that we had been cooking together. And after he cooked some of the food that we ordered, he personally took them to our table and he still watched us to take the first bite. And when I did, I was utterly surprised. He saw my face wide eyed and he felt it's like, oh no, I messed up. But he asked me with a cautious question, how was it like? How was it? William, well, you, he started almost like being pale, almost like sweat in his face. You did good. What? This is really good. Even better than mine, I admit this is really good. You really improved your skills. Ever since then, I started to going back to my family's home. And what about me and Elisa? Well, we weren't dating anymore, so since I was now with Betty. But my relationship with Elisa was still at the beginning very rocky. It was very awkward between me when I was teaching her how to cook. But since now she was actually pregnant, but even though in a few months she would have to step down to maternity leave. But she and William actually got engaged shortly when she was around a few months in. They decided to get married. I asked if they wanted if they wanted a big ceremony. They shook their heads and said they just wanted to have a courthouse ceremony instead. But my brother asked me as the witness, and I actually said yes, because since my brother had improved and actually succeeded by the cooking, we started to work out our relationship again. It was very hard for me to see this story of my own brother if I hadn't even come back to see my brother being betrayed me, worked so bad, even though he worked his hardest, but eventually would have let the family restaurant just being closed. And I could not let my grandparents' legacy end like that. And after they did have their small courthouse wedding, we actually went back to our parents' house where our parents had prepared a small meal. Betty, who were Elisa's also witness, was there as well. In fact, we were also engaged. We only been dating for only like a few months. But we had known each other since high school, so there was like no problem. And I told my parents, listen, now that eventually Elisa would have to be on her maternity leave soon, or sometime, if the restaurant is struggle with some support or any help, or if you need any extra help, I will be there. But what about my new boss's next parents? I give my full approval that I can start working at our family restaurant from time to time if needed. But I had to give them at least a heads up first. But if there's an emergency, I will have to tell them I will be there to help out. I will be goddamn don't let our family's restaurants go down since our grandparents struggled so much of it. And my parents just nodded, and my mom cried, and she said, "You have grown so much for the past few months, Michael. I was really sad that you wanted to cut ties with us. But I'm proud that you've really grown so much. Well, at some point you had to grow up even more, and then Then you had to, I said. It's part of being a family. Even though I was considering not even help out, I said. But my dad just nodded and said, we understand. So, from time to time, if my family need help, I went over there to help them. Sometimes it was just maybe just a day or maybe 2 days. But at least this betrayal that my brother did was hurtful. It took time for me and my brother to be able to see each other normally without being actual end up in a fist fight. Even when I heard this betrayal at first, I wanted to beat him. But now I'm happy that we all have moved on from that. And this is how my story of how I was betrayed eventually reconciled all. Thank you.